The following is paid programming. Opinions expressed are not necessarily those of this radio station, its advertisers, or sponsors. Welcome to All About Love, a program for couples, would-be couples, or anyone with an interest in having amazingly successful relationships at home and at work. With your host, Wendy Pegan, relationship expert, mediator, and founder of the Creative Relationship Center, and sponsored by the Financial Planning Center. If you would like to participate on today's program, call now, 803-1520. That's 803-1520.
Good morning. This is Wendy Pegan, founder of Creative Relationship Center, relationship coach and mediator, and host of a brand new program, All About Love, which we're really very, very excited to be having you share this with us today and share with you. This is our very first show, and so there's a couple people I would like to mention because since this is our first show and our first time in the studio, anything can happen. We're expecting anything interesting to happen. But I would especially like to thank Brian Mazurowski. Did I get that right? Okay. Who's our engineer today, and he's stepping in for the gentleman, Jim, who is going to be our engineer for the following programs. But thank you, Brian, for stepping in today and kind of showing us where everything is at. I'd also like to thank Courtney Kruger, who has been my wingman through all of this, gathering all kinds of research and bringing me up to date, bringing all the research straight to my fingertips so we can do this show. Today, joining me this morning are some very special guests and associates of mine, and they're also team members of mine at Creative Relationship Center. And I'd like to introduce them separately. They will be answering calls today and talking with me about expectations. The first person I'd like to introduce is Leslie Martine. She is a licensed mental health counselor. She specializes in working with adolescents and adults and couples in all areas of their relationships, and she has a unique expertise in doing some trauma work with EMDR and mindfulness. So, Leslie, I'd like to welcome you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Wendy, for that. And yes, so I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of you in the audience who may be listening to us this morning about what some of your concerns regarding your relationships may be. And, you know, I feel really lucky to be in a place where I am able to help people who may be struggling with, you know, just the stress of life, some anxiety. You know, sometimes it looks like trauma or unresolved issues. But, you know, for the most part, I really love just getting to connect and work with people, help to break that down, to make it a little bit more manageable, because there are certainly things that we can all do in our lives to just, you know, help be a little bit more present and reduce some of that stress so that things go more smoothly and, you know, our communication increases and we're happier.
Okay, thank you. And our other special guest today is another associate of mine and a very good friend, Tim Sobolewski from Certified Financial Planners. Or I'm sorry, he is a certified financial planner from the Financial Planning Center. And Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to say a little bit about what you do?
I'm a fee-only planner. The Financial Planning Center is a registered investment advisor, and we specialize in working with middle-class investors. We have no account minimums, and as part of my work with the Creative Relationship Center, I handle questions regarding financial issues as they come into marriages and relationships, and at one end of that, work with couples as they're beginning a marriage, and at the other end, we may work with them in divorce mediation in helping to do the financial analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And at this time, maybe it's a good idea to just tell you a little bit about Creative Relationship Center. The reason that this center was started was because after years of experience of working as a marriage and family therapist, and often seeing couples come into the office once they've reached the point where really it was way too late to unravel all of the issues that were going on with their relationship. And unfortunately, they were headed towards divorce, and that happens way too often. One person's got one foot out the door before they even set foot into the office to help them with their relationship. And they end up on the other end and in the clutches of divorce court, which is a really horrendous place to be. So we started the center for the purpose of helping relationships in all areas of their relationships from the beginning, from the time they meet. We're seeing more and more people who are coming to us. They're running into expectation issues, which we're going to talk about today. They're running into some previous past experiences. Maybe they've been in relationships before that didn't work out, and or their parents were divorced, and they don't want that to happen to them. So they're coming in and working through some of that problems. Bravo to you guys. I think that is just fabulous. We also see families or couples who are coming in. They've been married for a number of years and running into some problems, and they want to stay together. So they want to work through these problems. And then, of course, we also see and take care of the couples and the families that are currently going through a divorce. And we help them to divorce in such a way that it is civil and it is pleasant as it can be, and helping their families, their children, stay a family so that they're not all fighting and arguing and going through that horrendous revolving door of divorce court. So with that, I'm going to ask the audience a couple of questions because we're going to be talking about expectations today. And one of the things that often comes into our offices is how many times people feel their feelings have been hurt because they've mistakenly assumed someone else knew what they were thought or didn't do what they expected. Getting angry or annoyed with someone who acted differently than you expected. I was telling Leslie as I was leaving today, I was walking outside my door getting into my car, and it's a beautiful day. So I noticed that everybody around me was mowing their lawns. And I was thinking to myself, when I come back, or I wonder how many women, not in my case, but how many women are wondering, when I come back this afternoon, when I walk through my door, if my lawn's not mowed, and I see my husband on the sofa reading the paper, drinking a beer, watching a game, I don't know if there's any games on right now, and not having mowed the lawn, what might be my reaction? And we kind of got a chuckle out of that because every single one of us has ideas and expectations of what our relationship should be like. And we talk about things like perceptions. What kinds of perceptions do you have about the relationships that you're in? Did you want to address that?
Well, I think one of the things that does come up for a lot of us is that those perceptions are really formed, like you said, Wendy, based on a lot of our past experiences, and sometimes also about how we, want either others to perceive ourselves or, how we think about our ideal partner. And, even just if you consider so many people these days are looking online for partners, online dating, and, what kind of opportunities does the internet really open up as far as that whole thing where you can really kind of create a persona for yourself online that may or may not be in line with who you really are. And
yeah, the internet, that's an interesting thing. So many things have changed. I was on WBEN about a year ago, and we were talking about the internet and Facebook, and is this a dangerous thing for relationships? And as it applies here, we could do a whole program on Facebook alone. The number of, and I'm sure you have too, and I've just seen so many people who've come in, and Facebook has really put damage in their relationship.
Completely.
But the kinds of expectations that we have for the relationships that we're in, whether or not we have expectations when we're going out and seeking a partner, what do we expect? Do we have expectations of what they look like, their physical attributes, their values, their family background? At one time, I know when I was growing up, I heard I was supposed to marry someone who was Italian Catholic. I don't know if you heard any of the same things.
You know what? I was really fortunate in that respect, and I didn't. I didn't really have that put on me, so that's good.
Well, yeah, that is good. But a lot of people are growing up with those kinds of expectations. So, some of the things that I hear from people will be, and I love this one, and audience, please share if you have any similar feelings. But I hear a lot that, once you get married, he'll change.
Right.
No, Tim?
Well,
you don't change?
It doesn't always happen. I think that people do hope.
What about
for
I'm
change.
working on him? I'm working
well,
on
there
him.
you go. Yeah,
Right.
I'll improve him.
Yeah.
I have
It's getting
certainly
better.
I have certainly had that. I think that even happened to me maybe last week, where I asked a client about, well, what did you think was going to happen once you got married, and
They'll change.
the person said, I thought I could change him or her. Really? I think those are some of those perceptions and unrealistic expectations that we walk into relationships with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think my response was kind of like, how's that working out for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know about you, but I expect coffee every morning in bed. We're supposed to expect that our mate knows when we've had a bad day, that they're automatically going to draw the bath, they're automatically going to cook the meal. My one personal expectation is once I clean the kitchen, it should stay clean for 24 hours.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
absolutely.
And
So all of you ladies out there, if you're the ones cleaning the kitchen, or guys, if you're the ones cleaning the kitchen, 24 hours. Nobody eats at home. Your mate should be taking you out.
Yep, my husband is always joking with me after I've done that. We have a black stove, so of course any bit of dust or anything shows up on it, and his big joke is, my clean stove, because I'm always following after anybody with, wiping that up after, because I did just clean it, so.
Yeah, sometimes you have to kind of learn that little routine. If the expectation was if you're in the kitchen and you're cleaning, you're in the kitchen and you're cooking, that you're automatically going to clean up afterwards. Not so. There's a wonderful book out called Spouseonomics, and it discusses the different things that couples are good at and how they can learn to focus on each other's strengths rather than each other's weaknesses. And, if you're a better cook than I am, then maybe you should be doing the cooking and I should be doing the cleaning up. But not always true. What if I clean up in 10 or 15 minutes and it takes you an hour and a half?
Right.
So better to let me do the cleaning up. So let's talk a little bit about how past experiences can affect relationships, because certainly none of us are clean slates when we come into a relationship. If you're fortunate enough, I have a friend who's been married 47 years. They just celebrated their 47th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
And I know.
That's
I know.
amazing.
I don't know how many people are out there. And I asked her, what's the secret? We always want to know as social scientists, what's the secret to your success? And her comment to me was luck. Luck.
Oh,
Hope for a more constructive answer.
Yeah, that's not what I was hoping for. I really wanted something I could do a dissertation on. But her comment was luck. And luck meaning that, yes, they had some similar backgrounds, they had some similar values, but she's one of these people who likes to talk about things. And I do know, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that women are talkers in the relationship. They like to do the talking. They like to face a lot of problems head on. Gender differences do come into play, but women in general will use talk as the glue that holds the relationship together. Guys, on the other hand,
She's looking at me.
guys, I don't know, Tim, maybe you'd like to talk about that, because guys, they don't particularly like to resolve the issue right away.
Well, I think that guys enjoy talking. We don't necessarily, though, enjoy talking about problems in relationships. So,
or your feelings, right?
those feelings too.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
I'm not sure. I'm reminded, though, thinking about change here of the men's prayer, from the Red Green Show, which says that I'm a man, but I can change if I really have to. I guess. And the lodge would say that prayer every week at their meeting. So.
What lodge do you belong to?
I don't belong to that.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, let's talk about a little bit where past experiences affect relationships. Family values. Where do these things come from? Family values. We talked a little bit about tradition. I mean, we're all of the generation where, at least I grew up in a neighborhood where there were, well, yes, I grew up in an Italian neighborhood, so my family lived next door down the street, 3 blocks away. You couldn't get away with anything. But there were some values that my family also had that were important values, like, honesty, integrity. But there were some other things that maybe other families didn't have. In my particular family, the Italian side anyway, men kissed, they hugged. That was different. And my friends would come over, they would see the men in my family do that, and they would say, "What is wrong with your family?" So, and some other family values. How do you spend Christmas? What do you do when you walk in the house? Do you take your shoes off? Do you keep your shoes on?
Well, and how many of those values, a lot of times those things are unspoken, right? So you see people then, as adults in relationships trying to work things out where maybe that was the unspoken expectation that you take your shoes off as a kid, and you just, you saw that, so you accepted that, but, then you're more likely to make the assumption that your partner should just know that that's what you do when you walk in the house. And, I certainly have had that conversation with clients where they're upset because, their husband tracked mud through the kitchen or whatever and didn't take his shoes off.
Yeah.
Well, how's he supposed to know if you don't ever communicate that?
Well, don't they just know?
Right. I mean, how often do we hear that, right?
Why shouldn't they know that? Well, especially when you're dating, if they come into your parents' house and your parents have the rule that you take your shoes off. What happens when, though, you decide to move in together? Whose rules stick?
Yeah.
Whose expectations stand out as being the ones that we're going to use? What about past relationships? People who come in from past, we see a lot of people who have been divorced. They've had past relationships, past experiences, and those relationships have been not so great. Obviously, if they were great, they'd still be married.
Right.
Not great relationships. And maybe there was a lot of yelling or a lot of screaming that took place. Maybe there were expectations that you would perform in a certain way or do certain things in ways that were different from my liking. So those things can come in to the new relationship.
Absolutely, they do. And at the core of that, aren't we really talking, which we could probably do a whole nother show on this, but really like trust, right?
Yeah.
Because we have those expectations that are built upon this foundation of I trust that you're going to, behave the way that I think you should, or the way that people in the past have treated me, for example. Let's say you've had some bad experiences. And it can be really a challenge for the couple to break out of that. And, I think that is just one thing that the couple together has to agree to try to work through, because none of us are free from that baggage, so to speak. We all have something that we're bringing forth with us.
Absolutely.
Our past determines, who we are at the present.
I often talk about having pictures in our head. We have these Norman Rockwell sometimes pictures in our head of like a photo album, like the way things are supposed to be. When we talk about how we grew up in our family, or Christmas. This is a big one when couples are getting divorced. We have discussions about, do you have Christmas Eve? Do you have Christmas Day?
Right.
Is it during the day? Is it in the afternoon? Is it in the evening? Do you want to be there when the kids get up and open up their presents? Can this take place? Can they open up presents on Christmas Eve? People get very, very upset about having to make those changes when they're divorced, because they had a perception in their head, an idea in their head of how it was supposed to be.
Right. And I think when you're talking about, holidays, for example, are such deeply rooted traditions. Those may have been in place for generations. It's a lot harder to shift or let go or have to change something like that than, maybe do you take your shoes off when you walk in the door kind of a rule.
Absolutely. Right? We have Natalie asking a question about expectations. Natalie, you're on the air.
Hi, thanks. I don't know if you were going to talk about this at some point later on.
Natalie, are you there?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Oh, Wait a minute. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
I don't know if you're going to be talking about this at some point later in the show, but I have a recent experience of very disappointing situation of unmet expectations, and I think the main problem with it came about with how to communicate these expectations. And we talked a lot about how different people bring things into relationships and different ideas, and particularly thinking about an ideal partner. But for those of us like me who have a very difficult time talking about emotions and expressing vulnerability in front of someone else, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety that comes around that, what are some ways to navigate that so that you can wind up having a productive relationship that's not just held back by fear or anxiety of how this other person is going to view you?
Well, that's a couple of different steps there, because you're asking a really good question. And communication, of course, is definitely the key on being able to break through some of these expectations. A couple needs to be able to, and by the way, I shouldn't just say a couple. I mean, a relationship can be a mom, a dad, a sibling. It doesn't necessarily have to be just a couple. But communication is key in being able to let the other person know what it is that you need. And oftentimes we come from a background where maybe we were taught how to push a lot of our feelings down because they weren't accepted. So consequently, we don't bring those up. We don't bring those to the table. We were either made to feel guilty, or we were taught that our feelings didn't count, and the only feelings that counted were those of an adult. So it may take you a little bit more time, maybe to help with another professional, to learn how to be able to express those feelings to your partner so that you can come to terms with them, you can understand them a little bit better, and then be able to find a way to assertively communicate those to your partner or whoever it is that you're in a relationship with, and let them know that you have some real strong opinions, some real strong feelings about what's going on. And allow them the opportunity to really get to know the real you, get to know what it is that you're feeling. I can't tell you how many times I've had couples who've been married for years and had absolutely no idea what the other person was thinking or feeling. And they're doing something the same way. It's kind of like getting a back rub and somebody's rubbing your back on the same spot to the point where it's driving you crazy. You need to let them know, move your hand. just do something a little bit different. So you need to be able to let them know that these are what's going on deep down inside. And if you need some help learning how to do that, then you may want to meet with somebody to work on that.
Well, and I will just add on, Wendy, to what you were saying, because I think that's really helpful. And since we're talking about expectations, and this could be my personal value, so I will take responsibility for that. But I do feel that when you are in relationship with someone, whether it's a partner or a friend, family member, that it is perfectly reasonable to expect that, okay, let me clarify that. As long as the person is safe, right, that it's reasonable to expect that you can be open about how you feel. Because really, to have a functional relationship, you need that core of trust and open communication. And sometimes I think that starts, as far as how to start that conversation, with really a belief, like learning to accept that your feelings are valid and that you do have a right to communicate them. And for a lot of reasons, I think many of us are taught that as, kids or whatever, that it isn't as important, or we should put somebody else first. And so we are more likely to keep our mouths closed about really what's going on. And it certainly is scary and, frightening to be vulnerable about that. and open. So I think if you can find a way to just believe that you are worth it and that you do bring something of value to the relationship, that can start it.
Listeners, please call in at 803-1520 if you'd like to ask a question that either myself, Leslie, or Tim can address. You know, I wanted to bring, Tim, you're awfully quiet over there, so I wanted to bring up something that you might be able to address, which is one of the many expectations that people come into relationships with is the expectation of finances. And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with couples who are spending just a ton of money on a wedding, but they have spent no time whatsoever investing in their long-term marriage. And because you see couples, both in the beginning of their relationship as well as at the end of their relationship when they're dividing up their finances and finding out they don't have as much to go around as they thought. So how much do you see finances creating an expectation in couples?
Well, I think from beginning to end, finances can be an issue if they're not addressed early on in a relationship, and they're certainly an issue when a couple is splitting up. As you know, when a couple is divorcing, one of the 2 or 3 biggest reasons for divorce is financial. And we can help address those during the divorce, but it's an awful lot easier to talk about those early on in the relationship, where people have expectations, for example, about savings habits, about spending habits, about budgeting, about investments, risk tolerance, and so forth.
Risk tolerance, yeah.
Yeah. Well, very often risk tolerance for a husband and wife will be very different.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm working with a couple, I need to somehow come up with an average, if it's a joint account, as to what they expect in terms of risk and return and so forth.
Do you usually see a gender difference between those that are more risk tolerant than others? Is it more men or more women, or is it just 50% across the board?
It's not really gender specific. If I had to generalize, though, I'd say that perhaps women are slightly more conservative than men overall, and there's some good reason for that. They live longer. They live alone longer. So
wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah,
Right.
But it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
But do you also find that women are generally the ones who are taking care of more of the finances?
It's typically one party or the other, one partner or the other, that will take care of the finances in the relationship.
Okay. But but it doesn't matter. See, I grew up in a family system where women took care of all the money. They didn't work outside the home, but they took care of all the money.
Sometimes it's the man, sometimes it's the woman.
Yeah.
I feel that I made a same-sex omission there, and obviously it could be one partner or the other,
Yeah.
regardless of gender. And that does raise an issue in financial planning, because when someone dies or someone is disabled or incapacitated, it's very important that the other partner be able to pick up the slack and have some familiarity at least with the issues that the financially oriented partner was dealing with.
So how do you get, some of your clients to open up and discuss about that? Because I think I've certainly seen in my office, money is really personal.
Very
and
personal.
It is.
It isn't necessarily easy to talk about that. And a lot of times people get into relationships without having a discussion about, those kinds of things, values. How much are we going to save? What are we going to spend?
Are we going to put our money together in a checking
Right.
account?
Are we going to
keep it separate?
Exactly. It's a tricky issue.
How many times do you hear from couples they have no idea what the other one makes? No idea at
Right.
Well, they should.
Really?
When I'm working with a couple, it's important to get them to open up about their feelings about money, what their objectives are, what their fears and worries might be about money, and or maybe about how the other partner is handling money.
Right.
And those can come from family background, from previous experiences. I mean, every experience affects our expectations of the next experience.
Absolutely.
That's true of finances as well as everything else. In my business, the expression is past performance is a guarantee of future predictions.
Is or is not?
Is.
Is. Okay.
I mean, I guarantee whatever happened in the past, someone will make a prediction about the future. and that can be part of someone's expectations, too. If they've had a bad experience with an investment advisor, for example, they can be awfully gun-shy getting into the next one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and we certainly see that all the time. I think there's gender differences, too, in terms of expectations is that we expect women to behave in a certain way. We expect men to behave in a certain way. Expectations as simple as, a chivalry. Do we expect a man to open the door for us? How does a man feel when a woman opens the door for him?
Mm-hmm. Well, I
You
like
like
that.
that?
I have no problem with that at all.
Or, and we can spend a whole nother show on this, and we will, is dating expectations. Is when you're dating at 18, when you're dating in your 20s, when you're dating in your 30s. What about when you're dating in your 40s and 50s and you're both professionals? Who pays? How do you handle the dates? Who makes those decisions? These, again, all are oftentimes based on, well, I grew up in a home where my father was breadwinner, my mother stayed home, so she didn't have the money.
Right.
So therefore, it was expected that it was going to be handled in a certain way. Religion. How about trauma? How does that affect couples?
Well, the thing that happens when, one person or the other has been through a traumatic or difficult life experience is that, one of the things that occurs is the way that you look at the world or people or yourself shifts as a result of that traumatic experience. And so, it doesn't have to be anything necessarily life-threatening. It could be an instance of a betrayal in a previous relationship, or, someone lied or someone cheated. And, all of a sudden, the way that you really believed that things were and functioned and how you would be treated and how other people act, all of that can kind of get thrown into the mix and shift. And, it's not necessarily a permanent shift. There are things that absolutely we can do to help kind of get you back to yourself, but we can't take away the fact that that experience happened, and sometimes there are some long-lasting effects from that. Yeah.
There can also be financial lies and betrayal, by the way, in the case.
Absolutely.
That's brought many a marriage to an end, where people have secret overspending, gambling issues. It can drive a family into bankruptcy.
Right.
Absolutely. And I wonder how many marriages do survive bankruptcy. That's often a tough case, especially when one partner may not be aware. Let's just mention a couple of other issues, and then we'll take a quick break. Another couple of issues regarding expectation would be sex.
Yeah, isn't that a huge
often?
one? Right.
And how often do you have, and I always go back to this Woody Allen skit from the movie Annie Hall, where there's a split screen and they're both in front of their therapists, and their therapist asks, how many times a week should we have sex? And he says, 3 times, not enough. And she says, 3 times a week, way too many. And so the perception about how often they're having sex is the same. Or the number is the same. But their ideas of whether or not that's too much or too many is completely different. And so addressing that sometimes with people is
It is a big issue.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not just, sometimes it's also quality, not just quantity. And
finding that out with people.
Right. And that, just like money, it's one of those taboo subjects that a lot of couples don't talk about. And there's a lot of unspoken expectations or assumptions about, he should know how I'm feeling, or he should know what to do, or she should know what I want. And
how come they don't?
Right.
We talked earlier about, wouldn't it be nice if we could all marry a virgin and they would all know what they were doing? How perfect would life be?
And who happens to be psychic mind reader, so they know exactly what it is. Right.
The last one would be age. I think. Do you often find that sometimes the oldest child in one family marries the youngest child of another family? Do you ever see that? I see that a lot in my practice.
Hadn't thought of that.
The oldest child oftentimes who's taking care of a lot of things, and the youngest child who allows everybody else to take care of. So they get married, and when they first meet, they're opposites, and they really think this is great because I'm in the role of taking care of everybody.
Right, and it's comfortable, familiar.
Very familiar. Till about 3 years later, when that roller coaster ride of everything you do is wonderful and great, and I love everything about you, kind of hits a a wall.
Right, the honeymoon is over.
The honeymoon is over, and all of a sudden, you know that thing that you were doing before? It's really bugging me now. So
That was the thing you found so charming on the first date.
you found those charming on the first date, and I often when I'm working with couples, I often find that sadly, when couples are divorcing or they're in the midst of separating, I ask them what did they really like about their partner when they first met, and oftentimes that's the very reason they're divorcing. Please give us a call if you would like us to answer some questions, 803-1520, and we're going to take a fast break.
It used to be Mom never thought about how to fill the day because she was always taking care of Dad. But after Dad was gone, the house became too quiet. Then Mom got Clara, an orange tabby from the SPCA. I'm telling you, it's like they're joined at the hip. Mom fixes Clara's meals, combs her hair. They watch Days of Our Lives together. They're the perfect couple. Clara gets treated like a queen, and Mom has someone to take care of.
Your independent SPCA of Erie County. It's not funded by the government. It's not supported by tax dollars. But the SPCA is always there when they're needed, whether they're helping a family adopt their first puppy or rescuing pets from a national disaster. To get involved, just go online to yourspca.org. Because when you support your independent SPCA of Erie County, you're supporting more than the pets. You're supporting the people who love them.
Open your heart to the SPCA, because love is a four-legged word.
I'm NASCAR driver Bobby Labonte. At 200 miles per hour, many unseen dangers can arise in the blink of an eye. That's why we have spotters high above the track. They help drivers avoid trouble. Parents need to play the same role when it comes to kids and computers. As a parent, I know the internet can take kids to wonderful sites for learning, entertainment, and fun, but it can also lead to danger. Here are some safety tips. Keep the computer in a family area where you can see it. Proactively teach your children never to share personal information online. Become knowledgeable about signing on to websites, searching for information, and using email and instant messaging. Doing so will help you recognize potential dangers. Familiarize yourself with safer websites and post that list by your computer. Like our spotters, parents are best positioned to see the dangers kids could face online and to help them avoid them. Make a commitment to keeping kids safe online.
A message from WebWise Kids and Ask.com.
There's just one place where students are students first, and athletics are played with purpose and perspective. There's just one place where a team is more than a group of individual agendas. It's a catalyst for demonstrating the potential of the collaborative spirit. There's just one place where players, coaches, and fans experience the exhilaration that happens when an entire community rallies behind the school team. That place is your local high school. High school sports offer more than the joy of competition. Studies show that student athletes are more likely to enjoy greater levels of achievement in other areas of their lives, including academics. In addition, high school sports help young people in New York develop the discipline and confidence they need to be leaders in life, even as they unite communities like nothing else. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the New York State Public High School Athletic Association and the New York State Athletic Administrators Association.
McGruff the crime dog here. I deal with a lot of criminal types, and lately, more of them are identity thieves, because identity theft is one of the fastest growing crimes in America. So let's hear how they do it.
Identities are easy to catch online. I just go fishing for them. I send people an official-looking email pretending to be their bank or credit card company and ask them to confirm their personal information. Hooks them every time.
Stealing folks' identity is as easy as standing behind them on the checkout line. When they open their wallets, I'm ready to take a picture of their driver's license with my cell phone camera. It's a snap.
You can learn a lot from the criminal mind, but you can learn even more from me. Safeguard your personal information on the phone, online, and especially around the house, because half of identity theft is committed by people you think you know. Take it from McGruff. Keep your identity to yourself and take a bite out of crime. For more information, visit the National Crime Prevention Council at ncpc.org.
A message from this station, the U.S. Department of Justice, Crime Prevention Coalition of America, and the National Crime Prevention Council.
You're listening to All About Love with Wendy Pegan. Call now, 803-1520. That's 803-1520.
And we are back. talking about couples and expectations and families and how having way too high expectations can absolutely ruin a relationship. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes, I know we have a caller, but I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just talking about when are expectations reasonable, because we've talked for quite some time about how having too high expectations or unreasonable expectations is very unhealthy for a relationship. But what about having reasonable expectations? Do you think that we should have any expectations in a relationship at all? What would it be like if we didn't have any expectations? What kinds of expectations do you think we ought to have?
Well, I think that's somewhat on a case by case, right? Everybody is an individual. But what I will say about that is I think it can be really disastrous when we don't have any, because that allows for like an anything can go kind of scenario. And I mean, how do you function if you don't have a basic structure or assumption about this is how we're going to function in our lives together, right?
I think there's some basic expectations that couples have that, for example, that their partner will be faithful, that their partner won't spend them into bankruptcy, that their partner will attend to the children properly, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that most of that expectation is going to have to come out of that constant communication. Couples often communicate to each other in the beginning of the relationship the things that they love about each other, but they really don't like to talk about the things that they don't like about each other because they're fearful that that's going to have some taboo. And most of that, by the way, comes from the fact that we haven't done a good job of boundary setting, or we don't know. Here's probably the biggest one. We don't know what we want. We don't know, so we can't communicate what we expect because we really don't know what we want.
Right.
We haven't done some kind of a vision board or a life planning for ourselves. You know all about this, Tim, with financial planning. But we also believe that you have to have life planning, because in that, you have a better idea of what I expect, what I want from my partner. So I could go out and look for it before I try and mold somebody else into something.
Well, right. And I think, too, one of those things is to have, an understanding that what I'm expecting of my partner is also an expectation that I'm willing to live up to.
Right.
Because I can't, be mad at you for leaving dishes in the sink if I'm never going to do them myself.
Right. Exactly. We have a couple calls, so let's take Ed, who has a problem with being a parent. Ed.
Hi.
Hi, Ed.
Hi. Okay. I went through a bad road with a divorce where my wife, before she said before we split up that if we ever split up, she'd turn my kid against me and keep her away from me forever, and she'd remarry and she'd hide under a new name, and I'd never be able to find him. Well, if I went through that hell, what do you tell these guys that go through this, and then they get divorced, and the woman starts pulling this crap and doesn't send kids to visitation. You take her back to family court like you're supposed to, only to get in a brick wall where the family court judge just says, well, honey, you can't do that no more. You got to let the kid go see daddy. And then you're just repeatedly doing it again and again and again, and it's just like drives you nuts.
Yep, I agree. This is one of those situations where family court is that roller coaster, that revolving door that I was mentioning before. If at all possible, we do like to have couples mediate their divorces so they don't have to go to court. If we can prevent that and keep you out of court in the first place, it's a much better situation, because couples can then sit down, they can talk about what it is that their issues are, learn how to communicate, maybe for the first time ever. Sometimes couples don't know how to communicate during a marriage, but they learn how, because they have to still be parents after a divorce. So there's a set of expectations that go along with being parents of a divorced child, or of a divorce, and dealing with your children. As far as the alienation goes through family court, I'm not going to necessarily address that. I'd be happy to address that with you if you wanted to contact Creative Relationship Center at 446-9226. But alienation is a huge issue, and we do try to avoid that at all costs when we mediate with couples through their divorce, and hopefully they'll never get to that point. Couples do play all kinds of games with children, which is just a really bad place to put kids in. We have another question on tips for or on financial gender roles. Hello, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. My name is Carlos.
Carlos?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes. Can you elaborate on, can you give me tips on how to handle different financial gender roles?
What do you mean by financial gender roles?
Yes, I come from a Hispanic background, and I've been transplanted to America. And there's a different expectations from either the male or female. Usually, where I come from, the male is a provider, and this also might be generational, not just cultural. But it seems like females are becoming the providers. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to encourage everybody to participate with this one. But a lot of things have changed. Those cultural expectations that decades have changed how women and men now approach money, mostly because women are working full time. And as they're working full time, perhaps they're making even a higher salary than their partner. And you know, sometimes with money comes power. I think that happens a lot of times in relationships where whoever's making the higher salary oftentimes feels like they're the rule makers or the ones who have the power of making decisions. Tim, do you see that? I don't know if you want to address that at all, because I think that is a kind of a growing, I'm not going to call it a problem, I'm just going to call it a growing issue among couples, is how do we respond? It's not the 1950s anymore. There's not one breadwinner. Right. But do you think men still feel the need to be the breadwinners?
I think that some men do. I think that this is what Carlos is calling about as sort of a cultural overlay to a problem that exists certainly in all cultures in this country, in that some men are disturbed that they're not the breadwinner, that their wife was making more than they were, and so forth. I think it can also be difficult for someone coming from a different culture where there's, again, a set of expectations, as Carlos described, as to the man being the primary breadwinner, which I think is most often the case, to bring those expectations in and modify them in this country, where that's certainly not always the case. And I don't know that that's specifically cultural. I think that there's a gender bias sometimes. Sexism still exists in this country, and pay scales and so forth. In my business, for example, I read an article recently where the average income of women in my business is only about 62% of what it is for men. So, and I was surprised by that. Women are not proportionally represented in the financial planning industry or in the brokerage industry or any part of the investment industry. But they should be. And when they are parties, for some reason, they're making less. Now, I think that some of that may be the fact that women take on sometimes much more of a domestic responsibility than men do. So,
yeah, I think that's true. Leslie, how do you find that finances might be affecting gender differences with the people that you work with?
Well, I think it's a really complex issue. And again, it goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about so far this morning, and that's those expectations, whether there's the ones of the larger culture or not, but a lot of times, the couple themselves or the family hasn't really discussed that. And, I've heard cases where, someone who might be bringing in maybe less is paying a disproportionate amount of the bills, or, one or the other partner feels entitled to spend more money because they make more money, and they're just not talking.
Right.
The two people are just not talking and coming to an agreement about, this is what is going to work for us, because they don't think there's one fits all scenario.
Well, and that brings up the complicated discussion about if the incomes are unequal, which is usually the case.
Right.
Who contributes what to household expenses? Is there a joint account? Does each person carry their own expenses separately? Do they combine some money? It's a discussion that sometimes couples don't have until there's already a problem.
And I think oftentimes that begins with, I know there's been discrepancies with couples in my office alone with how much money do you spend on a wedding?
Mm-hmm.
What's the traditional amount? I've had a couple of kids get married, one who's been married, one who's getting married, and you know, who contributes to what? If you're an adult, do you pay for your own wedding? Do you expect mom and dad to pay for it? What's the contribution here? And the couple themselves. Oftentimes I sit down with pre-marriage couples and finances have not been mentioned at all. It's just assumed, especially even if you've got two professional people. They're both making maybe a pretty decent income, but nothing's been discussed as to who's putting their name on what. And certainly the financial differences. We have a class at in our couples college at Creative Relationship Center where we can address the financial aspects of being an unmarried couple versus a married couple. New York State has a special help for people who are married, not so much for people who aren't married, and sharing resources. So, having some communication with the couple over budgets, something very simple like a budget. I know, Tim, you handle budgets with couples.
I do. When they need help with them, I'll help them set up a budget, talk about some of the issues they might have in terms of spending and saving, and that discussion can surface areas of disagreement and try to work toward compromise and better cooperation.
How many couples come in, do you think, without a budget?
80%.
80%.
Yep.
Do you have a budget?
Do
you have a budget?
I don't have a budget. I will admit that we don't. Yeah.
It certainly can be a source of conflict. Well, we have a couple more minutes. We have 2 more minutes, and if anybody has a last-minute question at 803 1520. You certainly can log into the website at www.creativerelationshipcenter.com or call us at 446-9226. And as our clock is ticking, I just want to mention how to get in touch with Tim and Leslie. Tim at the Financial Planning Center, you can reach him at 716-240-4304. And Leslie Martine, you can reach her at her website at www.wnyholisticcounseling.com or reach her at 435-3546. Thank you very much, Leslie and Tim, for being with me here today. And
Wendy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we're looking forward to meeting next week at 11 o'clock on All About Love.